Okay, epithelial tissue. This is kind of a lot. There's a bunch of types. It's not actually complicated. It is really easy to overthink, so just promise me you won't overthink this, okay? All right, so epithelial tissue covers or lines every body surface and every body cavity. Your skin, yes, is made of epithelial tissue. It's the top of the skin is epithelial tissue. I should rephrase that. The digestive system is lined with epithelial tissue. Your mouth, lined with epithelial tissue. Your nose, lined with epithelial tissue. Your lungs, lined with epithelial tissue. All of your organs, lined with epithelial tissue. All of the pockets within your body, what we call body cavities, lined with epithelial tissue. Okay, there are different types with different shaped cells and different numbers of cells. Okay, there's a very specific naming convention for them based on that. And they're going to differ depending on their function, because remember, form and function go together. All right, so all epithelial tissues have an apical side, meaning a top, that is exposed either to the external environment or to a body cavity or to a cavity inside an organ. Okay, so your heart has 4 cavities in it, 2 atria and 2 ventricles, and those ventricles are lined with an epithelial tissue. Okay. Your heart is also inside a sac, the pericardium, that is made out of different kinds of epithelial and connective tissues. The skin, the top of the skin, is the apical surface of epithelial cells that are exposed to the outside of environment. There are many layers of those cells. The tops of the other cells in the layers lower down, those are exposed to the bottom of the neck. I know that's weird, right? But the epithelium itself, the whole tissue, is going to have a surface that is open to a cavity or the outside environment. The bottom of the cells is attached to the basement membrane. The bottom is called the basal, B-A-S-A-L layer. You don't have to know that, so I didn't write it down, but if you want to. There you go. All right, now, here's 2 different types of epithelial tissue. This one is 1 layer of cells. Okay, that's 1 cell. There's its nucleus. There's the apical surface. There's the basal surface, and this is the basement membrane. Okay, 1 layer of cells. It's called simple epithelial tissue because there's 1 layer of cells. Okay, if there are more than 1 layer of cells, even if it's just 2, then it's called stratified. Strata are layers, so it means it's layered. Stratified means layered. So this is stratified epithelium. So here's the basement membrane. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 layers. Okay. So all of this is an epithelium. This, by the way, looks like your epidermis, the top layer of your skin. So now, if you're wondering, like, hang on, these cells look like different shapes than these. Yeah, an epithelium can be kind of complicated, but this is still stratified tissues. Okay? All right. Now, the other way we distinguish epithelial tissue is by the shape of the cells. So if the cells are flat, we call them squamous or squamous. These are flat. These are flat. Yeah? If they're kind of roundish, kind of the same width as height, we call them cuboidal. Now remember, oid means kind of, like not really. So they're not cube. They're like, not super flat, not super tall. Okay. If they're tall, they are called columnar. Now, a lot of people ask, like, hang on, isn't this cell just this cell put on its side? But remember that epithelial cells have an apical surface and a basal surface. So is the apical surface, the top, bigger than the side? Or is the side, the lateral surface, bigger than the apical surface? See this one? The apical surface is smaller. The side is really long. Does that make sense? So this is a column. This is a squamous cell. Squamous actually comes from the word for fish scale. So if you look at them from the top, let me go back here. This is kind of the shape of a fish scale. So there you go. Okay, so we got squamous, cuboidal, and columnar cells. Now, all tissues form and function go together. All organs form and function go together. So for epithelial tissues, think about the function when you think about what it's called, what it is, but then also remember this naming category, okay? It's either simple or stratified, and then we have the shape of the cells, squamous, cuboidal, or columnar, okay? And then add epithelial tissue, so we know you're not talking about connective tissue. So the epidermis, this is the epidermis of the skin, okay? And you can see that all of these layers here, the cells are super flat, right? There's a nucleus, and you can actually see the edge of the cell there. Super flat, not tall. And there are many, many layers. So many, many layers, we call it stratified. Flat cells, squamous. So it's stratified, squamous, epithelial tissue. Okay? Now, simple columnar is really good for absorption of certain types of things. So this is part of the lining of your digestive system. So these cells are going to have a nice big nucleus so they can make lots of proteins that are going to control what goes into these cells. And then the cell itself is going to be able to transport, and in some cases actually break down a little bit, some of those things, and release it to the other side where it can go through, find a blood vessel. So simple, one layer of cells, okay? And columnar, because they're tall and narrow. So simple columnar epithelial tissue. You can kind of see the basement membrane right there. Kind of in a lot of slides, it's not obvious. Now, this down here, this is a different tissue. Okay, so this is not two layers of epithelial tissue. This is one layer of epithelial tissue, and then this down here, that's actually primarily areolar connective tissue. All right. Some columnar cells, epithelial cells, have cilia. Remember cilia from our chapter on the cell. They're little projections that move in waves. And this is really important in parts where something needs to be moved through a tube. So, for example, the fallopian tubes have cilia along the simple columnar epithelial tissue to create a current that catches the egg and moves it along the fallopian tube. Your trachea is also lined with ciliated epithelial tissue, but it's a little bit different. Okay? And if you're wondering why columnar ciliated columnar cells, I think it's just because you need a lot of space to make proteins to make new cilia. I think that's what it is. Okay. This is a tissue sample from the trachea or a bronchus in the lungs, so some type of air tube in the lungs. You can see again we've got this fuzzy layer of cilia, okay? And if you look down here, it looks as though there are several layers of cells. It almost looks like there's a cuboidal layer and then a columnar layer, or maybe two columnar layers, because you can see the nuclei aren't all lined up in one row. Like here, the nuclei are all lined up pretty well in one row. Here, they're kind of a mess, yeah? So this is called pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue because it looks like two or more layers, but it's actually not. It's a fake out. All right, the key is, except in one place, if there are cilia, then it's columnar cells, and there's almost nowhere. There's definitely nowhere where we have stratified ciliated cells. Okay? If it's got cilia, it's only one cell level thick. Period, end of sentence. There's no such thing as stratified ciliated. Okay? imagine if these cells, if there were a separate set of cells down here that had cilia, what would they do with them? They'd just be like rubbing the butts of the cell above them. That would be weird. Also useless. Anyway, so any ciliated tissue is simple. If it doesn't look simple, then it's pseudostratified. Pseudo meaning false. So it's fake stratified tissue. Okay, so this is ciliated, pseudostratified epithelial tissue. With cilia, moving the dust and shit out of your lungs. All right, now, very thin tissue is needed to line the walls of blood vessels and ducts that carry like secretions from glands in your body. Okay, so think of your salivary glands. They're located around your mouth. And then there's a little tube carrying that saliva into your mouth. You're thinking about saliva now, aren't you? You feel like there's a lot of saliva in your mouth? Isn't that weird? Okay, I'll stop talking about saliva. Anyway, though this is a little tube from a duct, from like a cross-section from a duct, from, I don't know if it's saliva actually. So these cells, like they're not super tall, okay? See how tall these are and how tall these are? These are like really columnar, right? These aren't particularly tall, but they're also not really flat. Like see these down here? These are really flat. Yeah, see how, and the like the nuclei are even super flat? Yeah. So these are squamous. These are cuboidal. Okay, so it's not columnar unless it looks really columnar. Sometimes you get some cuboidal cells that got a little like vertically smushed and they look a little columnar, but they got to be really tall to be columnar. Does that make sense? So this is simple, one layer of cells. There's the basement membrane. And then cuboidal, because they're not really flat, they're not really tall. Okay? This is a simple squamous epithelial tissue. This is lining a blood vessel. Those are actually little blood cells. Okay, does all that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, how are we doing? I'm going to stop this and then one little short section about body cavity.